and we can get started for the evening. Melissa and Rhonda, if you can turn your camera on, that would be great. All right. So hopefully everyone's dry. At least it sounds like the storm has stopped here. I'm in the city. Uh, okay, a couple
Oh,
of quick.
I think the storm is just starting over here. I'm in traffic, so
Okay.
it's a
All right.
bit
Yeah, no
scary.
problem. Keep your camera off. That's fine. Drive safely.
Okay.
All right, a
Okay.
couple of housekeeping things. Your second quant memos are due July 22nd. The assignment portal is up on Brightspace. Um, Also, I have been in communication in some way, shape, or form with all of you about your survey drafts. If you have sent me the live link and I got back to you and I said you're good to go, that means you can send it out. Now the survey itself is at this point, I would still think of it to be considered in pilot stage, which means that the rules for piloting apply, which means that it should be sent out to a convenient sample of people. That means that you can know all of the people. It also means that um, all of the people do not necessarily need to have every set of piece of criteria that you would expect for a full analytic sample. So, for example, if you are intending to survey recent college graduates, but this is a pilot phase, you can send it to anybody who graduated from college. The idea is that the group of people who you send the survey to need to have enough experience to reasonably be able to go through the instrument itself. The other thing you can do is if you would prefer, you can let me know that you would rather me send the survey out to people and I will send it to I have a pool of like 120 people who are in my personal and professional networks who I always test surveys on. Basically, I've accumulated them over time and they know a couple times a year I'm going to send them things and they're going to take them. Um, I would like you all to send the survey out to between 20 and 30, assuming like a 60+% response rate. Liliana, you raised your hand.
You kind of answered my question a little bit because mine was focused on like accessibility and like students with MS. Um,
Yeah, what I would do is there's a couple options. One is you can send it to people who you know who have experience in the space and could answer them. You can also, though, I've had students in the past reach out to the students for the Office for Accommodation, Student Accommodations, and say, I'm piloting this instrument. If there's anybody like in your database, in your system that would fall under this, but if you want, you and I can also chat about that during a breakout tonight.
okay.
Um, I would like to see some of you. I've seen like the paper format of the survey. I would like to see everybody's programmed survey before they go out, just to like check for a couple of things that sometimes we don't think about when we're programming things. It's fine in terms of building it in Google Forms, Microsoft Forms, SurveyMonkey. If you want to do it all on one page, it's also fine if you want to separate them. Again, that's kind of personal preference. The key piece is that there is clarity at the front end about the purpose of the survey. So some of you have very explicit and clear titles, which tell the respondent what the purpose is. Some of you, Christian and I were just referencing it. He needs a little bit of an introduction because he's asking people to comment on this idea of rapport. So he needs to define what that is in advance of people taking the survey. If you want to use Qualtrics, you can. If you want me to program it into Qualtrics for you, because I have a Qualtrics license through my lab, I can add you as a temporary authorized user. The benefit of Qualtrics is really if you have a complex survey that requires a lot of logic, like skip logic, or if a lot of subsequent questions are dependent on prior answers. So, for example, Liliana, going back to yours, let's say your survey wasn't just about multiple sclerosis, it was about a number of different diagnoses. So somebody could say they have multiple sclerosis, somebody could say they have dyslexia, somebody could say that they have ADHD, and you then want to ask a series of subsequent questions that auto-populates multiple sclerosis or ADHD in the text of the question. Qualtrics can do that kind of logic for you. If you're not, if the survey as it stands, and I haven't seen any, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think any of you have that level of logic. The kind of pros of Qualtrics don't really outweigh anything relative to Google Form and Microsoft Forms. Also, if you're dealing with like thousands, Qualtrics is really helpful because it catalogs all the dissemination information. So it tells you like anytime a link was opened, how long it was open for, all that kind of stuff. You guys are not sending things out to hundreds even. But again, if you think you might want to use Qualtrics down the line for your dissertation and you want to get in there for a little experience, let me know and we can talk about adding you as a user. Yep. If else, yep. Other questions?
In terms of programming, the program itself, like Qualtrics, it will be able to do all that. We just have to input, like how, I don't know how it works. I
If
just want
you
to make
need
sure.
that kind of skip logic and conditionals, Qualtrics has like drop down menus that help you build it, but I don't think your survey needs any of that right now, Rhonda. What your survey actually has needs is the capability to do a matrix question, right? Where you have a series of statements and then you ask people to locate themselves on agreement scales. All
Mhm.
survey platform tech, even the free stuff, has that built into it.
Okay.
Yeah, so
So I should be good.
you're fine
Okay.
with that. Yeah. Um,
Okay.
and Google actually has a nice job. They redid their like design features recently. It looks nice and it looks nice on a phone, it looks nice on an iPad, it looks nice on a giant screen. Other questions? All right. So, what we're going to do tonight is we're going to have a brief discussion about kind of some of the steps that you need to take in advance of disseminating your methodology. Some of these are 100% specific and solely related to quant, but some of them are relevant across the methodological spectrum. So, we're going to talk a little bit about pre-testing and pilot testing. Then we're going to move into the concepts of reliability and validity, which are unique and only relevant in the quant space. Then we're going to move into correlational analysis. We're going to talk through kind of the definitions and the theory behind it. We're going to go into SPSS. And we are going to introduce means comparisons and means testing depending on time and also how much bandwidth you guys have. We may go into SPSS for means testing, but that will kind of depend on your prerogative at the end of the evening. So let's start with pre-testing and pilot testing. So can anyone tell me what they think the purpose of pilot testing is? Al.
It's economical as opposed to disseminating on a broad scale.
Okay, say, what do you mean by economical?
The pilot is cost effective, meaning that you don't have to spend millions of dollars just to see whether or not something will become effective or not. In a pilot, you could just have like a sample group.
Certainly that would be the case. Yeah, I would think I should qualify more in terms of like not generally, but for academic research, right? So we're not always spending millions of dollars, just so you guys all know you don't have to. But yes, certainly it is a smaller scale. It is definitely cost effective. Liliana?
Wouldn't they both kind of be like trial runs to see like what works and what didn't work, like depending on like what type of like questions you were asking, like what did people like say, like maybe you have to tweak it a little bit to kind of get like a certain, like outcome, if that makes sense. They're kind of like test runs, sort of like
Yeah.
cause and effect. Like, let's see if this works. Maybe the wording is differently, or maybe I didn't fully explain it correctly. Like, if that makes sense.
Yes, that does make sense. What you are actually describing, I would think of as like a phase two of a pilot, and we'll get into that in 1 second. But certainly, a piece of this is a kind of trial and error comparing different phrasing and framing. Yep, Melissa.
Um, it's also being able to see if you'll get like enough responses. So kind of like in tandem with what Liliana was saying, just testing out to see if the pool of recipients that you're sending out, or just seeing if it's viable enough to send
Yes.
it to the group of individuals that you're sending it to.
Yeah, the viability piece is really important here. So, and this actually crosses the entire methodological spectrum. And if you haven't already gotten the message, you will all have to pilot your own methodologies, ideally in advance of defending your proposals. Although there are scenarios where students will defend their proposal and then pilot test while they're waiting for IRB approval. The main purpose of pilot testing, right, is to help you identify any potential issues, right? Are there clarity and comprehension issues? Is the language clear for the intended respondents? Is the kind of reading level appropriate for the intended respondents? Is the phrasing appropriate? Also, this notion of respondent fatigue, which is a big problem in survey research, right? Does the instrument itself just take too long to get through, which means that people may be more likely to abandon the instrument halfway through? Um, I see students, and I'm sure this has come up in class. I have a lot of students who get really excited because they open up the platform and there are 100+ rows of data. But then when they actually look at the individual columns and the cells where the answers to the questions are, they realize that only 57 people answered all of the questions. And a lot of the times it's because people got 3/4 of the way through and it was 20 minutes and they were tired and they didn't want to do it anymore, right? Instrument bias, survey fatigue, those are real things, right? So you want to make sure that you test out the instrument in its entirety to make sure that it's feasible to collect the information. The other two pieces that are critically important here, which one of these speaks directly to what Melissa just said, you need to make sure that the instrument you design or that the instrument you're using, which somebody else could have designed, is actually going to get you the information you need to answer your research questions, right? So, Christian, you want to get information from people about this notion of rapport, right? You could ask people a series of yes or no questions that could be like, do you have a good rapport with this person in your building? Do you have a good rapport with that person in your building? That's just simply going to tell you if they think that things are good. It's not going to give you any description. It's not going to give you anything about their experience, right? The same thing applies to qualitative interview questions, right? If you ask somebody, if you are interested in understanding, for example, I have a student right now who's developing an interview protocol for non-white teachers working in predominantly white schools to understand their experiences of racial microaggressions. The first draft of the interview protocol asked a lot of questions about who do you interact with in the building, describe them, tell me about their background. Is their background the same as yours? Tell me about an interaction. There was not a single question or follow-up or prompt that explicitly asked about the extent to which their racial identity came up, the extent to which they felt like their identity was kind of coloring or affecting the interaction between people. There was no mention of microaggression. There was no mention of stereotype. She went out and she piloted it, and she got a lot of really she had interesting transcripts that gave you a lot of detail and description about a teacher's day, but nowhere in there was the mention of these specific things, right? So the pilot test isn't simply, will people go through this whole thing start to finish and understand the questions? It also is this actually getting me the information that I need to be able to address my research questions? And specifically in the case of quant stuff, to either confirm or refute my hypotheses, right? Because in quant, remember, your research questions should all be translated into hypotheses that you then seek to collect data and analyze to either then say, I can confirm my hypotheses, or I refute it. So you're looking for things about related to comprehension, logic and flow, acceptability. You want to make sure the questions don't cause offense or touch on sensitive subjects in an inappropriate way. Many of you are going to collect data on sensitive subjects. That is okay. You just need to make sure that you are doing it in a respectful and appropriate manner. Length is really important, as I mentioned. Ideal surveys go somewhere between 7 and 12 minutes. Certainly, there are surveys that take way much longer than 12 minutes, and people complete them. A big factor in that is the extent to which the introduction to the survey properly explains the purpose. If you understand why you're doing something, you'll be more likely to follow through with it. There's also issues related to technical quality, right? Is the survey platform you're using one that operates smoothly? If you are doing survey research for your dissertation, one thing you definitely should do when you pilot it is make sure people take that survey on all the different tech pieces that people will. So test it on a phone screen, test it on a tablet screen, test it on a big screen. Sometimes SurveyMonkey used to look really crappy on a phone because they didn't actually have a version that would shrink everything to fit on a small screen on a phone. So you would have to like scroll to the left and the right as well as up and down, and it just made it really cumbersome to do. And a lot of people take their surveys using that kind of tech lately. The other thing is the pilot can also give you a really good sense of the quality of your introduction. When you pilot test for your dissertation, in addition to going through the instrument as you intend to apply it when you collect your dissertation data, there should also be some debriefing. So if you are pilot testing qualitative methods, at the end of whatever the method is, you debrief with the pilot respondent. Let me ask you a few questions. Did anything make you uncomfortable? Was there anything you didn't understand? We've been sitting here talking for 47 minutes. Was that too long? Do you feel like it should have been longer? In the context of a survey, you would add a couple questions at the end of the survey, asking respondents to gauge whether the instrument was too long, too short. Was everything clear? Did they understand the goal of the survey after reading the introduction? And then what you do is you summarize that information and you include it in the chapter 3 in the pilot section write-up. Sometimes the pilot will reveal things that make you go and change your instruments. Most of the time, though, if you've done a good job preparing and drafting things, everything comes out fine. The other thing to think about too is that the pilot feedback can be useful, but it's ultimately up to you, right? If you ask somebody, was that too long? And they say, oh, that survey was way too long, I hated it, but they answered every single question, it's up to you to determine whether or not you want to actually cut it. Melissa.
What is that section in chapter 3 called?
It's usually called pilot study, depending on if it's a quant study, it usually goes, you introduce your instruments. So you introduce your kind of context, population, sample, and your sampling plan. Then you introduce your instruments. Then you introduce your analytic plan. Then you do your pilot study. So in July of 2026, I piloted my survey among a convenient sample of 25 early childhood educators. all 25 did the survey. It took them approximately this much time. Feedback showed. If it's qual, people usually put it after you introduce the instrument before you talk through like your coding plan.
Thank you.
Other questions? And this goes without saying, I hope, but if you happen to be collecting data in multiple languages, you have to pilot the instrument in multiple languages. And usually, what will happen is if you submit your IRB application prior to piloting, they might give you conditional approval, and then you basically submit like an addendum memo that's like, oh, I piloted this, everything looks fine, and then they give you approval. Other questions?
And in a case where you are doing different languages, could it be, because I know Google Form allows you to do sections, could it be still one survey, but it'll just jump the individual to their preferred language?
What I would do in Google Form is ask the question, what language do you want to
Right.
take the survey in? And then, because Google Form can do basic skip logic. And then if they say Spanish, it goes to the Spanish section. If they say English, it goes to the English section. Yeah.
And that would be fine.
Most SurveyMonkey, Microsoft, and Google can all do very basic logic. So, do you have children? No. Next question, what's your job title? Do you have children? Yes. Next question, how many children do you have? SurveyMonkey, the paid licensed, can do more complex stuff. Microsoft and Google cannot do, they can't like auto-populate the name of a class or things like that in, like you said, this teacher, Mr. X, was biased against you in 11th grade. Tell me about a time. Like they can't do that one, no. But they can do basic stuff.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Do you recommend using one or over the other, or is one better than the other in terms of?
I think that I think SurveyMonkey is actually kind of janky, for lack of a better word. And I think it's on purpose because they want you to spend the money to pay for the license. But you don't get that much more for the money, so I don't actually think it's worth it. And I've found Microsoft and Google have done a much better job, and it's probably because Microsoft and Google also sell tech of programming to fit different screen sizes, which sounds like not a big deal, but it actually is a really big deal. You want people to feel comfortable and to only have to think about the questions they have to answer when they're participating in a study. You don't want them to have to be like shrinking the screen and expanding and scrolling up and down and left and right. And I think that both Microsoft and Google have done a lot of kind of product testing in that space. Certainly, if you're talking, and I have yet to see, there was a student, I want to say she finished in 2021 or 2022, who did a national survey of female superintendents. But well, she was about gender inequity in the superintendency. And so she had well over 150 female superintendents and then like 300 male. Like she did this national search and she somehow got state superintendency, I might be saying this all wrong, associations to disseminate for her. And so her sample size was like 300 something. That's the largest number I've ever seen anybody in this program get. That still is well within the bounds that any of these free platforms can handle. If you were telling me though that you were like rolling out this sample in all 50 states of like higher ed staff broadly, doesn't matter what their role is, right? They could be a faculty member, they could be a groundskeeper, they could be a coach, they could be whatever. And you were going through like all these different, the American Association of University whatevers and like the NCAA, then I might say you might want a program like Qualtrics that can house the data. But if we're talking hundreds, like all of these platforms can handle this stuff easily.
But if
Uh,
you if we're starting out now, and let's just say I use Google, and then as I progress, my um, studies are getting more complex, am I going to have a hard time transitioning from Google to another platform
No,
like
you can
Qualtrics?
always export a survey instrument from the platform into a readable PDF and then
Okay.
upload that readable PDF into a new platform. Yeah. I don't see rationale necessary why that would be problematic. No. Um, and I think that unless you are dealing with a certain degree of personally identifiable information, which full disclosure, you're not, because IRB is not going to give you approval for that at the doctoral research level. The kind of protections and privacy stuff that's available by using OneDrive through Manhattanville is fine. Whereas some of the Qualtrics can do like password protected encrypted cloud stuff. But our IRB's not equipped. They just wouldn't. Like, I mean, they have trouble when faculty ask to study minors. So, other questions? The last thing I'll say on this, which actually has nothing to do with quant, but since many of you are not quant, I think this is an important piece. For the qual space and piloting, in addition to making sure that the questions yield information that you can actually use that has a utility function, and because when you pilot qual, you are a part of the process, right? So you can see people's facial expressions and reactions to the questions. A big piece of that piloting process is what are their physical reactions to the questions. If you ask a question and you get an answer, that's great. But if you ask this question across a couple of people and they wince every time you ask it, or you ask questions that are designed to give you like a vignette, slice of life, very descriptive set of information, like in paragraph form, and the response is yes, or it was okay, obviously something's not working in that question, right? And I think in quant, because you as the researcher are abstracted from the data collection process in the majority of the time, this doesn't come up. But in qual, a piece of the pilot is like, what is your reaction to the set of interactions? What is your own reaction to the process? Because just like when I ask you guys questions sometimes and you all stare blankly back at me and then I ask a follow-up, right? Like that doesn't make for a good interview, right? So if you're going through especially if you're going through your pilot and it's a convenient sample of people who you potentially have some sort of familiarity and rapport with, and they're like, yeah, it was okay. Like that's not good for coding, right? You want like description, you want animation, you want emotion and feeling behind that, right? Which is also why a lot of qual research is semi-structured, right? So you have some questions you know you're going to ask, but then there's some questions that you in the moment organically pose as follow-ups based on information that you get. All right. Any other questions on pilot testing, anything like that? All right, let's go into measurement criteria. So measurement criteria basically defines the set of criteria that you as a quantitative researcher have to establish in advance of conducting the study. So these are things that you both have to make sure are clear, are there demonstrated and obvious in chapter 3. These are also the exact things that the IRB is going to push you on. In other words, if any of these things appear to be missing in your IRB application, these are the things you will get feedback on. So they are objectivity, accuracy, precision, and then reliability and validity. Okay, the first one is fairly obvious, but there are a lot of ways that this one gets messed up. So the notion of objectivity being that the researcher stands outside of the phenomenon they study, meaning that data are collected free from bias. What are some ways you think that objectivity can be kind of clouded in a quant study? And to give you a hint, it has a lot to do with where you get the data from. Is that a hand, Melissa? Go ahead, Melissa.
Yeah, but I realized after what you said that maybe it's not on the
Well,
same.
it could be there's many,
But
go for it.
I guess phrasing the questions in a way where you're um not necessarily that you have control over how the question is gonna get answered, but it might get skewed
Yeah,
because of how you're
certainly
phrasing it.
no leading questions, right? Math is hard. How'd you feel about the math test today, right? Or like, I know that the community center's reputation around this is really bad. How did you feel about that, right? Certainly, question wording is a piece of this. There is one kind of common mistake a lot of people, and so far I don't think any of you have presented me with this. I may be wrong on that, but I have a lot of students who come to me proposing a project that is not objective. And it is because they want to study where they work. I redesigned this math curriculum at this community college. I want to do a study of that curriculum. I work in the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at this community college, and I want to study our policies. IRB's not going for that. Even if it's quant, right? You are essentially studying something that you are integrally a part of. You are not objective in the analysis of it, right? You know all the ins and outs of the processes, the policy. The one exception could be if you work at an institution and you are studying like a different program, a different department, or you're working at an institution and you are studying something in your department or space that happened like before you. So I did have a student who was actually trying to look at they changed the manner in which they disseminated these assessments at this one particular college, and it used to all be in person, and then they switched to computer platforms so people could do these like weekly assessments anywhere. All of this happened like outside of him, and prior to him coming, the data was retroactive and the scores existed. They had the weekly assessment scores on paper from years ago. They had the initial computer ones. So basically, he had nothing to do with that process. But if you are not outside of the phenomenon that you are studying, then the data you are collecting is not free from bias, and you're gonna have to you have to go through a lot of hoops to prove to IRB that it's okay. But certainly the manner in which you ask questions also really matters, right? So no, like we said, leading question wording.
Can I just say something about art?
Yeah, go
That's
ahead.
very interesting that you said that because I've heard that people have studied their workplace, not necessarily under the parameters that you just said. Like a lot of times people are frustrated in their workspace and they want to do a study. And I've heard, I don't know how true it is, but speaking to people who have gotten their doctoral degree, they were talking about how the certain things they used was about their workplace.
I mean, I have never seen IRB. I have seen IRB approve quant studies where the researcher was not a part of the data collection, or they were not a part of whatever the program or the policy that resulted in the data. So I've seen students who are like higher ed faculty do an analysis of a certain like testing rubric. They didn't design the rubric. They did have to apply it to score some of the information, but they didn't design it. And the study was to see like if this is a more effective way to measure X versus the original one. I've never seen anybody get a qual one. There is something called participatory action research, which is traditionally qualitative, and similar to participant observation, you are a part of the process. Our, I will say though that like our IRB is an IRB at a predominantly undergraduate institution. As you all maybe know at this point, like our IRB is not rolling. There are a series of static deadlines and monthly meetings. They don't actually meet all 12 months of the year. We don't have the infrastructure to, like most institutions that have IRBs are larger, and so they have more personnel. And so if somebody's proposing to do participant observation, it goes to a specific subset of the IRB. Or if they're doing health research, it only goes to the health folks with like one or two social scientists. We have one IRB that has a couple faculty from SOE, a couple faculty from SAS, and a nursing person on there, and they read everything. I have never seen anyone's qual stuff get through. I know there are some students right now trying to put together participant action research proposals. And I'm not sure if it's gonna go through. Let me think. There's the chair, there's 3 SOE members, 3 SAS people, I think it's 9 people total. It's small, and that's it. So whereas, like if you go to like a large university, there's like a social science IRB panel that also includes like hard science and another person as like outside objective people. And it's also on a rolling basis. You submit whenever you can, they read them as they come in. It's like, and there's also dedicated staff who just do that. The chair's Meng Fei Kai, who is a social psychologist. She's in the School of Arts and Sciences. But that also rotates. It used to be an economics professor. And that's all on the IRB's website. We also, as a faculty, tend to dissuade you from studying your own backyard because of some of these issues. But if you, like I said, I do have a student right now who I'm not the chair, but I'm on the committee, and they're trying to put together this participatory action research project. And we are, basically we're going to like test it out. The idea is that in this approach to research, it's more collaborative and it kind of blurs the line between the researcher and the subject. It comes out of Paulo Freire, who wrote Pedagogy of the Oppressed and is one of the kind of preeminent thinkers behind critical theory. The idea is instead of like studying down communities, so a university trained researcher comes along and like embeds themselves in a community and kind of stands on their soapbox and looks down at people, that you as the researcher are an equal part of the process that you're researching. You're already a part of the community. You didn't embed yourself solely for the purpose of data collection. You already were there. And you're trying to understand systematic change or the cycles of change, and the kind of direct actions that are being engaged to work towards that. It's a much more critical approach to research. There's a lot of reflective practices in this. A big piece of data collection is the researcher's reflexive journaling. I'll let you know in August if this goes through. But generally, we don't like you to study your own backyard because there's a assumed level of objectivity. However, though, there are instances where you might be studying where you work through data that already exists that somebody else collected, and that is okay, and you were not a part of the process, right? So that can get through. I'm still not sure if I've ever seen anybody get that through qualitatively, though. Always quant. Other questions? Okay, so we make sure that the researcher stands outside of the phenomenon. The second approach is this notion of accuracy. Are the methods adequate to answer your question? This is where your pilot testing really comes in. Do the survey questions that you have drafted reveal credible information? A lot of this has to do with the absence of bias with respect to measurement. A common example of checking for accuracy can be found in this example, right? Do you ask age in years open-ended, or do you ask people to put themselves in grade bands? Which approach do you think is more accurate?
The second one.
Why?
Because for me, a colon indicates options versus a blank is like stating your actual age.
So one is that like the second option has already essentially coded things for you, and there's a standardization there. In the second option, there isn't going to be any confusion around the unit of measurement, right? Now, certainly with most adults, they're going to tell you their age is 47. That is my age. My kid is going to tell you what, though, probably. If you ask my recent kindergarten graduate how old she is she going to give you one whole year? Some of you have kids, were kids. How do little kids say their ages a lot of the time?
They're all over the place.
Yeah, like what?
Maybe I think could be 5.
There's that, but she was never 5. She was 5 3/4. She was 5.5. She was 5 in a week, right? The unit of measurement could differ. The other thing is for questions like this, same thing goes for income. Sometimes people don't want to answer truthfully. The band gives them some leeway, right? You don't want to say that you're 43 because it's over 40, so you go 40, 45. You don't want to say you're 67, over 45 feels a lot better. Just like maybe you're embarrassed because you don't make a lot of money, so 49,999 or less feels better than saying I make $7,000 a year, right? So there certainly is that. The anytime that there is, and this happens, and it's not just about the actual amount, I should say here in terms of accuracy too. If you give people an open-ended, some people are going to write numerically, some people are going to spell it out. That's more work for you on the back end to make it accurate. Okay, and this happens a lot. Open-ended survey questions are a pain in the ass. Not because people don't always give you valid or valuable information, but because you inevitably end up having to clean things. There are typos. People use different units. People respond in years or months or dollars or cents. It's like you have to do all this additional work. Whatever you can do on the front end to ensure that you are collecting standardized information that has the same degree of accuracy across respondents is really important here. Okay, so objectivity and accuracy are both really important. Following that, there's this notion of precision. How trustable are the measures? Okay, how confident is the result? Now, in quant, a lot of this comes down to statistical significance and confidence intervals. How confident can you be that the statistic that you are reporting represents the full sample? Well, this is where you get into significance testing. This is why large sample sizes are appropriate. This is why ensuring that there aren't crazy outliers that might skew your data is appropriate, right? Pilot testing and usability testing are key here, right? On the trustable issue too, this also goes back into this notion of like standardizing the units by giving people close-ended multiple choice questions versus open-ended free reign questions, right? If everybody is answering in the same units, the precision is higher, right? If they're kind of all over the place, it's going to be lower. And then the last two pieces, as I said, are this notion of reliability, which is the idea that if something was measured again using the same instrument, that it would produce the same or nearly the same results. If your instrument is reliable, no matter who you give it to in the sample, it should get similar information. Now, that doesn't mean the exact same information, but it means that if there's a series of questions in there that are trying to gauge job satisfaction, that no matter who you give it to in your sample, you're going to be able to summarize how satisfied they are at their job. So yielding consistent results over time or under similar conditions, right? Pilot testing is really important here. We call this sometimes test retest. You give the same item or instrument to the same sample twice and then correlate the responses. These things related to reliability are things that you have to do if you generate your survey instrument completely from scratch. You don't look at the census and use wording from the census. You don't look at existing instruments that measure efficacy or job satisfaction. This is why it's really helpful to find existing studies and borrow from those instruments. Because even if you change like one word in the question, the general question having already been used and applied and published establishes its reliability. Okay. There's test retest. This notion here is only works when things are stable. So you give the same item or instrument to the same group of people at two different points in time to make sure that you get the same information. If you have good, clear questions, this is usually going to be the case. Parallel testing is when you want to find, for example, like the reliability of a test of math comprehension. So you create a set of 100 questions that measure geometry, let's say, and you randomly split the question into two sets, 50 questions for group A and 50 questions for group B. You give them to the group at A at one point in time, and you give the group B at one point in time, and the result should be the same, right? Split half is where you're trying to test for a single knowledge area and you split it into two parts and then you give it to people at the same time and you correlate the scores. They should correlate positively with each other. The idea here is basically to test out your questions at different points in time or across different points of people. Going across different points in people would be inter-rater reliability, and this would be the extent to which different coders or of items yield similar scores. So this is really common in undergraduate grading. Did any of you go to big undergrad schools where maybe you were in like an intro class that had 100 plus students? Yeah. So usually in that context, and I went to an undergrad institution like that, and I went to grad school, you have your faculty members not grading your papers. There are graduate students or upper level undergrads who have taken the course who are grading the papers based on some sort of rubric. And in advance of becoming graders for the course, you will go through a series of workshops where you learn the rubrics and then you all get, TAs for your labs. You all get 5 tests to score and then you correlate your scores with each other. And if the rubric is useful and clear, then you should all score the same test the exact same way, right? And this is essentially to make sure that like one grader isn't harsher than the other. We do this also on faculty sometimes around like some of the awards that get handed out every year at around graduation time, like dissertations with distinctions, or there's awards for dissertations in certain subfields, and we have rubrics for these. And we are constantly reworking the rubrics because we are constantly in disagreement about which things are the best, and it's because sometimes they're not clear. So the idea is that and this would not be the case for your dissertation research because you're not going to have assistants coding stuff for you. However, this does apply if you are asking about the same thing in multiple different ways. So if you have 5 questions about job satisfaction and a person is truly dissatisfied with their job, the answers to those 5 questions should be correlated with each other in a certain way, right? It shouldn't be like, I hate my job, agree, and then my job makes me feel wonderful, agree. Those don't make sense together. So this notion of inter-rater reliability will also come up in quant research when you have multiple items measuring a similar construct. So anytime you see like a matrix question with a Likert scale, so kind of locate yourself from strongly disagree to strongly agree, and then there'll be a series of questions about like your experience with the students for accommodation or the accommodations office, right? In advance of analyzing those, you would establish the reliability of those individual questions to measure satisfaction. That is the one kind of, or I should say, the beginning point where reliability and validity kind of deviate from these ideas of objectivity, precision, and accuracy, because reliability and validity can be statistically measured and statistically verified. So let's look at some examples here. Okay. So a reliable instrument, again, is one that is consistent in what it measures. So a study of middle school math assessments develops an instrument. It's a 30-point test, so 30 questions on the test distributed to a class of 12 students. It was disseminated at time 1, March 1st, and then at time 2, 30 days later at March 31st. And here are the responses and the data, right? So here are the various students and their scores at the first dissemination, time 1 and time 2. Based on this data, would you say that this is a reliable assessment of math comprehension? What do you think?
I don't even know what class they're getting tested on. Or how the exam is being administered.
It's given
Yeah,
in the
it
same
seems very
way, 2
broad.
points in time. Who said something? Christian, was that you?
No, I was agreeing. It seemed like a little broad, so I don't know.
It's the same instrument.
So then in that case, I would say yes.
Based on what?
Um, Wait, am I unmuted? Yeah.
The average
Um,
change, Christian, look at the average change is negative 0.2 average.
Yeah, on average, this is a reliable instrument. The
Yeah.
average score at time 1 was 19.92. The average score at time 2 was 19.25. Yes. When we are talking about statistics, we are almost always talking in the aggregate on average. Okay, so you would look at the average scores at the 2 points in time at which the instrument was disseminated, compare them to each other, look at the difference. Now, if I actually said to you, across these 14, 13, 12 students, was it reliable for all 12? What would you say, Alvaro?
I'm not answering your question. I had a question, but
Okay, go ahead.
can we use a Z-score here?
You wouldn't need to because it's the exact same test. The units of measurement don't
Oh, it's the
change.
same. Oh, it's the same exact test, right?
The
It's
same
not-
exact test.
Oh, gotcha. Never mind.
You don't need to standardize anything. So on average, this test is reliable. But if I then said to you, is it reliable at the individual student level? What would you say? So student A went down 2 points, student B went down 4 points, C 4 points, D gained 3, E gained 7. etc.
I mean, the deviation is not too much.
It's not too much. You could argue that the student E, something might be off there, right? Now,
The
they
only
had it.
question that I see is E that has a change of 7. That would be
Yeah, at the individual level, there might be something to look out there. I would also argue that you would probably, if you were cleaning your data, you would look at student E and probably H to begin with because their initial scores were that much lower, right, than the average. Right, the range of scores on the 30-point test was 7 to 28, right? In the first instance, the range of scores on the test in the second instant was 5 to 27. So the range shifts a little bit, but overall, it's the same exact test given at time 1 and given at time 2. Okay. So this is a reliable instrument. Similarly, if you were studying something, some of you are looking at things related to satisfaction. Some of you are looking at things related to like the extent to which people feel needs are being met. There are existing scales that have been developed and published to measure those things. Which means that there are instruments that have multiple items that ask about the same thing in different ways. The purpose is so that you have further corroboration of the phenomenon. If you want to know if someone is happy at work, you don't just simply ask them, do you like your job? Right? You also ask how they feel about their working conditions. You ask how they feel about their schedule. You ask if they have flexibility. You ask if they feel heard by management, right? You ask a number of different questions in different ways to make sure people aren't just like yesing you to death or trying to make themselves look average, and to confirm that that's in fact how they feel. Al.
on the previous slide that you had, when we were looking at the range for one test score 1 and test score 2, right? One had a range of what is it, 20? T1?
T1 is 8 to 27. Yeah, so 19.
7 to 28, right?
And then 7 to 27 is 1, and then 2 is 5 to 27. Yeah.
So the difference is only like what, 2 points between them? So it wouldn't be significant like you stated, right?
No, probably not.
So we can use range to also make that
You can use range, yeah.
range in addition to just
You can compare the averages. You can look at the average change, right? The change on average was minus 0.2. Yeah, things like that. Because essentially reliability analysis relies on correlation. It relies on measuring the extent to which things are associated with each other. So if 5 items that are all designed to gauge job satisfaction are actually all gauging job satisfaction, then your responses to those 5 items should be correlated with each other. If they are quality.
So for instance, if we had like a particular student that scored, I don't know, a 50, that would be extreme because that would be an outlier to the data because nobody scored such a high amount, correct?
Well, in this case, it wouldn't be possible because it's a 30-point test.
Okay,
but
gotcha. Like a 1.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. Thanks.
Yeah. Other questions on this? So reliability is consistency over time. The idea, and this is important for dissertation research, because if you're gonna send out your survey to ideally hundreds of people, now the information doesn't all have to agree with each other because you don't expect every respondent to have the exact same experience, but you do expect to get the same kind of information from everybody that gets the test. The survey. And if the survey is reliable, that means that if it goes to 100 people and it's on job satisfaction, that you will get information that allows you to summarize the overall job satisfaction of all of the people that were surveyed. Al.
When we're making the survey, the questions need to be made mandatory, because if not, they're able to skip over the question and you won't get the
They
data.
should be mandatory. However, if there is a logical reason why a person shouldn't answer a question, there should be an answer option that allows them to do that. So, like
Oh, yeah,
NA,
yeah,
not
yeah.
applicable, don't know. Also, if
I
you are
refuse to answer,
asking
right?
about a topic that is potentially sensitive, you need to give people the option to opt out. The best way to do that, though, is to rather than allow them to simply skip the question, put in prefer not to answer. And that should be for both substantive questions on a survey instrument, but also for demographic questions. Sometimes people don't feel comfortable divulging certain identity-based characteristics. Give them the option to say prefer not to say. Yeah. Okay. So that's reliability. Then, yeah.
Sorry that I'm hogging you. Now on a Likert scale, which is strongly disagree or strongly agree, what would be the option there? We would just put, I
If
refuse
it's
to
possible
answer.
that the statement wouldn't apply to them, so to go back to the job satisfaction, if you ask about subordinates and a person doesn't have anyone who works for them, then there should be an NA option in the matrix.
Oh, gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah. Or like the flexible scheduling option is clear in the employee handbook. Well, if you don't have a flexible scheduling option, then that should be NA. Can you say reliability for something? What do you mean? Say more, Melissa.
Excuse me, because if you're doing a study that's qualitative and you have to interview your subjects, participants,
Yeah, subjects, participants.
um, and you're transcribing and coding all of that information, how would you then see reliability?
You
Like,
don't assess reliability and validity and qual. You establish trustworthiness and credibility. So, one, you have the trustworthiness part is that you clearly identify who you are, the purpose of the study, and you go through in the consent plan your plan for confidentiality and protecting anonymity. Also included in that is identifying the IRB protocol number and giving Manhattanville's IRB contact information. The credibility piece also comes through in the description and summary of the purpose of the study that is in the recruitment materials, the consent forms, and the introduction to the survey. When you conduct qualitative interviews, before you start recording, read through the consent one more time. Then you ask them if you have permission to record. Then you start recording. And then on the record, you say one more time to confirm you consent to participate and you give me permission to record. And then all of that is in your transcript. And then you have the signed consent form with that. Yeah. And then to further extend both trustworthiness and credibility, depending on the degree of kind of intervention, so to speak, or the like the amount of time you are asking of the participants. So I don't know if anybody has come across a dissertation or a study yet, but there's a qual method called interpretive phenomenological analysis. And the idea behind IPA is that you return to your respondents more than once and talk to them again about the same thing. In IPA, a piece of that is to further establish trustworthiness and the rapport of you as the researcher with the respondents. So if you're talking to people about particularly sensitive topics, this allows you to like develop more trust. The other piece that's really important in this is a clear plan for what you're going to do with your qualitative data when the study is done, and making sure that the respondents are well aware of that when they consent to participate. So like, where are these transcripts go? Where are the digital recordings, right? Because everything's on Zoom these days, right? Where is that video recording going? Are you keeping it forever? Is it password protected? Are you deleting it after the transcription is done? Those kinds of things. Yeah. So, in the dissertation guidelines, in chapter 3, there's a section for quant, that's reliability and validity. In qual, it's trustworthiness and credibility. There is an assumed, you can argue how valid you think this is, but there is an assumed level of credibility that you all will approach this with, because you will all walk into and validity, because you will all walk into your dissertation research with IRB approval, and the idea is that this like objective body of experts has reviewed this, which is why we have
That
human
approval is
subjects.
only valid for a year, correct? After that, you gotta get reapply, right?
No, it is valid. Technically, it's valid for up to 5 years. If you anticipate it's going to take longer than that for some reason, which would not be dissertation, but for like longitudinal, you would specify that. And the thing to remember though is the IRB needs to approve your collection of the data, and they need to approve of your plan to protect moving forward. They don't need to approve of your plan to disseminate, publish, etc. though. So the real thing is, if for some reason you were going to take longer than 5 years to collect your data, then there would be a problem there. But in most cases, people take maybe a year tops. I don't even think I know anyone in this program who's taken that one. All right. So, all right, there are many, many types of validity. There's content validity, criterion validity, construct, internal, and external. Some of these are more crucial and important. We will spend a little bit more time on these. Content validity is simply, it's a non-statistical type of validity that basically involves you systematically examining the test content to determine whether it covers enough information about the behavior. So the extent to which the items on the tool, the thing that's being used to measure your dependent variable, reflect all facets being studied. So are all aspects sampled? So for example, if you're trying to assess mathematical addition knowledge, which test has more content validity? Test A, 3 questions. Test B, 3 questions. If you are assessing content validity about addition knowledge, which test has a higher level of content validity?
They look the same to me.
Nope.
Would it be A? Maybe? No.
Which leaves
B.
B. Why B?
I have no idea.
What's the difference between test A and test B?
They gotta learn about tens.
You got to learn about 2-digit addition on test B. Test A only has items that have single-digit addition problems. Test B ups the ante to double-digit addition, right? Now, certainly the much more valid test would have single, double, triple, etc. But content validity is the extent to which the items are measuring all facets of the phenomenon. Like I said, if you want to get at job satisfaction, you don't simply ask, do you like your job, yes or no? You ask about the schedule. You ask about the reporting structure. Maybe you ask about the benefits package, flexibility. Do they feel respected, seen, heard? You ask a lot of different questions. Okay?
Have education reimbursement.
Do you have education reimbursement? There you go. Can you leave early when you have class? That kind of thing.
Absolutely. Can I have off on Wednesdays?
There you go. Criterion related validity, which is also sometimes called predictive validity, is the extent to which a testing tool yields data that allow you to make accurate predictions about the dependent variable. For a very long time, the education space, but also the world generally, thought that SAT scores had a high degree of predictive validity around college success. We have subsequently learned, though, that because of some of the bias around standardized test scores and also some of the practices that some people engage in order to get higher standardized test scores, like test prep, right? It wasn't truly an accurate predictor of college success, right? But if your instrument has predictive or criterion related validity, it will yield data that allow you to make accurate predictions. If you are trying to answer causal quantitative questions, does A affect B? Does A impact B? Does A make B go up? Your instrument better have predictive validity. And this would get tested through your statistical analysis, right? If you go out and you collect data and you actually can't make valid conclusions about your dependent variables, it could be that simply the data, the phenomenon isn't what you think it is, but it could also be a problem with the instrument. Construct validity refers to the extent to which the testing tool measures what it's supposed to. So some of this actually has to do with the physical construction of the tool and like how you label it. So if you call something a dean's survey, right? And you go in and you tell students that this is to gauge what they think of the dean, they might feel pressure to respond in a certain way. That might not be how they actually feel. If you call it a campus survey, right? People might feel differently. But this also has to do with the extent to which the instrument actually measures things that you need to address your questions. So if you need to assess people's math skills, if the instrument has construct validity, it will give you information about people's math skills. Okay? Measuring unemployment during the pandemic, which happened quite a bit, did not have a high degree of construct validity because the reason why unemployment went up had to do with this specific event. It did not have to do with general market conditions.
It's like right now at the World Cup, 65,000 employment high in
There
May.
you go. There's all these vendors, parking lot attendants. Yep.
4 years from now, when they elect president, they're going to say, well, we increased the enrollment numbers, but it was the World Cup, right?
Yeah. Colleges like to boost when they have big enrollment gains. And do you know what's something that is a huge boost to undergraduate enrollment?
Unemployment.
Unemployment is one, but this is a like specific thing.
Is it athletic related?
Yes, it is athletics
like
related.
when their
What-
sports teams like win championships and then the following year there's
Yes.
enrollment gain?
Advancement in the NCAA tournament for men's basketball is directly correlated with a massive boost in enrollment in undergraduate institutions. Hofstra experiences, St. Peter's, which is a local regional university in Jersey City, experienced this after they went pretty far in the tournament a couple years ago. This is a huge thing. It's because all of a sudden, and where the biggest boost tends to happen is with these more localized regional institutions, because all of a sudden they get national coverage, right? Which is essentially free advertising for them. NCAA tournament advancement has been shown. There's studies that show this. It's super interesting to watch. And also schools that have historically done quite well in those spaces that tend to get like knocked out in the round of 64 also often experience dips
Right.
in the following year.
So I'm curious then, because the span of time is not necessarily long, but like for like the recent NBA playoff slash final slash championship, yay. Um, would NYC then be able to use that as like tourism numbers?
Maybe. I mean, I think New York's doing pretty well with tourism to begin with, but like there probably is an argument to be made about some of these like lesser kind of mid-level city arguments. Like San Antonio probably gets a boost. The thing is too that like there is an argument that these things are finite, except too like when your enrollment numbers boost, that means there's more tuition coming in, which means you can expand your marketing budgets, you can hire more people, right? So you can kind of keep these things going. Plus, the nature of undergrad enrollment is that in theory, you're bringing people in for multiple years in a row, right? So this is a big way that happens. I mean, you could look at the numbers for New York City tourism, in 6 months, you could look at the numbers for like July this year versus July last year. So that's interesting to know. But I bet like Oklahoma City probably had a bit of a boost when they made it pretty far. I think it depends. I don't know how far Hofstra went, but I do know I remember because there was the boost in St. Peter's enrollment was like it was like a 30% increase and like a 60% increase in applications from one year to the next. So, all right, that's construct validity. Then the last two types of validity are internal and external. So internal relates to the internal aspects of their study and the effect on their outcome. A lot of this is you as the researcher. Did you properly plan and prepare? Are participants able to be a part of the study free of judgment? Can you control for potential confounding variables? Are there things that are related to job satisfaction that you didn't ask questions about? Well, if that's true, then your study and your results cannot speak to satisfaction with a degree of internal validity, right? Is the survey programmed in a way, right? Prior to some of the improvements these platforms have had, if somebody tried to do a Survey Monkey survey on a small screen, it was really hard and cumbersome. You probably gave up, or maybe you ended up skipping questions and you didn't realize it. And then external validity, which is oftentimes thought of as the most important. And this is the extent to which your findings can be generalized beyond your own individual study's participants. So how valid are these results for a different group of people, a different setting, or other conditions of testing? So this has to do with your sampling frame and also how your instrument is disseminated. And pilot testing really helps in this, right? Making sure that if you were to give this instrument or conduct the study in another space, that findings would be similar. And also that are you able to take what you found about higher ed administrators in the Northeast region and apply it to higher ed administrators in southern states, right? If the instrument has external validity, then you should be able to gauge job satisfaction from both groups of people, regardless of where they are geographically. If the instrument does not have external validity, it's likely because the questions are too tailored to that specific geographic location. Maybe there are like more schools in the South that are on quarters rather than semesters. And so the questions about scheduling didn't make sense. Or maybe the pool in the South had more public institutions versus private institutions, and there weren't enough questions about that, right? Ideally, when you're doing quant work, you do want to be able to extrapolate from your small study to some sort of larger, broader population because it gives the value of your work a greater reach. Similarly, when you develop a qual study, you don't necessarily need to be able to generalize your qual results, but you would like your instruments to work in other spaces because that's another way that your research can get disseminated and kind of spread and cited, right? Your work gets cited not simply because they report what you found. Your work can also get cited when somebody says, "Oh, I read Al's study and I liked these interview questions and I would like to use them in my own study." Al.
So let's say I look at 50 to 100 journals and I use their data. So can that validate the external validity? Because now I'm not doing the collection data myself. I'm using somebody else's data from that research.
If you're doing a meta-analysis and you're using basically like similar results or some sort of common effect size across studies, you don't need to establish the validity of your own methodology because it's informed by all these different studies. What you do need to establish is the validity of the selection criteria, right? So you would have to have a plan that shows that you systematically selected journals based on a set of like pre-approved criteria. So it's not just the first 50 that showed up in the Google Scholar list, right? It would be peer-reviewed journals only, right? Not self-published stuff. Maybe academic journals have things called impact factors, which has to do with how widely they're circulated and cited. Maybe you would say impact factors of 0.7 or higher. There would be a time frame likely in these, right? You wouldn't want to go back too far. You wouldn't want to have like a bunch of articles from the 2010s and then something from 1975, right? So there would be like a set of sampling criteria that would establish the validity of the sample.
I
Other
hope
question?
I hope this is not a stupid question. What
No,
if people cite your study and criticize it?
it
Does that
happens.
happen a
Yeah.
lot?
I hope they
Um,
do. I hope they criticize me.
I mean, I would say so. I think yes, it happens. Um, it happens more than you think, but it doesn't happen in like the negative way I think that you're assuming. Um, what tends to happen is people will cite something as evidence that the scope of something didn't include everything it should have. So like Broge's study only looked at New Jersey, and we know that this phenomenon functions quite differently depending on like where you are in the country, or like the state of New Jersey has bizarre laws or rules around this. So actually, we're going to build upon that because we think there's a limitation there. It's usually in that context rather than like this is crap. However, there have been things that have been repeatedly and continue to be cited as garbage. The bell curve study that was done by Herrnstein and Murray, the psychologist, that tried to purport that intelligence falls into a perfect bell curve distribution and that certain groups of people are in the bottom half and certain people are in the top. It was an absolute garbage study. It was not
Yeah,
reliable.
but look how long it took for people to criticize that though. For a while, that
Well,
was like,
it didn't take long for people to criticize it. Um it took like 20 years for a group of equally known and renowned academics to publish a book directly criticizing it,
mm,
which then happened in the 90s. Prior to that, it was like journal article one-offs. I think it's that people from the second, I mean, they used the Armed Services Vocabulary Test as the primary determinant of intelligence. You can imagine what some of the vocabulary words are that are on the Armed Service Vocabulary Test are, because they're specific to the domain that they expect you to need some sort of aptitude in, right? Um, it took a while for that. I think that this might not ring a bell, but I want to say, was I still in grad school? At least 10 years ago, a sociologist named Alice Goffman wrote an ethnography about gangs in Philadelphia and was widely criticized because, at best, she knew about shady dealings. At worst, she was an accomplice to a violent crime. The second that thing was published, the criticism came out. I think, though, that like, and that was pretty like in popular press and widespread. But you also got to remember, like, a lot of this stuff exists in this bizarre academic bubble that you guys are now in, but that you probably weren't in prior to getting back into grad school. And so, but I think if someone is critically engaging with your work, that's great. They're citing you. I don't care if somebody critically tells me I'm limited or wrong. They're putting my name is in their bibliography. That's good for me. Like, people care about that. I mean, I only care about that because that helps me get tenure. Because they're gonna look at that, right? How many times are things that I wrote cited in stuff? Bad press is free marketing, 100%. Um, but it's you if somebody I will also say this though, that most of what is cited, and Verna, I see your hand, give me one sec, comes from a peer-reviewed publication space wherein there is at least three people reading your work um, when it is submitted for publication. Very rarely are things accepted from the outset, right? So there's at least two rounds of revisions. And then there's also an editor who makes a decision there. Similar with academic publishing versus popular press publishing, there are panels of reviewers who these things have to. So there are like iterations of checks around these things. And then also, anytime you submit for publication in a peer-reviewed press that's worth anything, and there are ones that don't ask this, but you don't want to be published there because people think they're a joke. You have to confirm, and sometimes you have to confirm with documentation that your study was approved by a human subjects board. So there are these kind of levels of protection to make sure things are sound, so to speak. But I'm fine with critique. Very rarely do you see people say, like, this is garbage. It does happen. Verna?
And disclaimer, I'm medicated.
Okay.
So I'm hoping that my question makes sense. But earlier you mentioned the notion of having an instrument that we create extrapolated by a larger or broader population. And I'm just wondering, in the grand scheme of things, like when how do we, as I guess, the creator, make considerations for that in the creation of our instrument? So, like, is it just structurally? Um, I guess, how how do we set ourselves up for the broader extrapolation, if that makes sense? I hope I'm making sense.
You mean, how do you make sure that your instrument can work in other spaces?
Essentially,
Okay. Well, one of them has to do with the actual construction of the items themselves, and this is why you would pilot test things, right? Making sure that there is clarity of wording, the comprehension level is appropriate. I do want to caveat all of this to say that when we talk about these things, we tend to talk in like sweeping general, like the comprehension level. But sometimes the comprehension level needs to be elevated because of the topic itself. And so, like, it wouldn't be necessarily appropriate for an 18-year-old, or let alone a minor, right? Or it might not be appropriate for somebody who doesn't have a certain level of education, and that's okay. I think, in my mind, your best bet in this space, given the constraints of the program and the fact that this is not a full-time, all you do is grad school and someone pays you to do that program, you guys have jobs and lives. The reason why we encourage you, and I encourage all my quant students, if there isn't an instrument out there that exists in total that you can just take pieces from different existing instruments, because the fact that they are published means they've already been proven valid and reliable, and all you need to verify that is cite where they came from. Because especially when you can find questions from these like larger, better funded resourced institutions like the Bureau of Labor Statistics or the US Census, because it means that people whose sole job it is to design and vet a survey constructed those, and those should be applicable across spaces. And it also likely means that if you need things, interpreted into other languages, or you need things reworded for different levels of education, that may exist out there to begin with. If you're doing this completely from scratch, so I do have a student right now who's trying to study New York State's Dignity of All Students Act. She's trying to study like compliance with it in school districts. And part of her survey instrument includes vignettes of like possible bullying cases that she is using generative AI to create. So she's like going to ChatGPT and putting in design a scenario where an 11th grade kid has A, B, and C happen to them. That thing doesn't exist anywhere, right? What she's having to do as part of her pilot, well, she already did this, part of her field testing and pilot testing is she had to go to experts in that specific space and confirm that the information that Gen AI yielded around these things is feasible and accurate, and falls within the scope of DASA. And what she actually found was the feasibility was fine, but the generative AI, there's not enough published on DASA, and Gen AI is just pulling from what exists on the internet. And so it was getting a lot of the like rules and regs that would get you in trouble and cited weren't coming up. Right. So that's really the only time when things might not work across these spaces. But it would be consulting with experts in the domain, having your committee go through the instruments and the wording with you. I actually find a lot of time with survey questions, and some of these people might be in your. I asked my 9, almost 10-year-old son, like, does this question make sense to you on a survey? And if he says yes, I know it's good. If he says, like, I don't really think I can tell the difference between agree and strongly agree, 9 times out of 10, he's right, and I need to go back and read. Like, there's a lot of ways to like go to the simplest space to get answers on this. Does that help, Verna? And also, if I'm allowed to ask, what are you medicated on?
Oh, hello, good people. I am but first, yes, that did help me. Thank you so much. A combination of things that I can't pronounce.
Okay.
But ones we know, oxy,
Okay.
aspirin, acetaminophen,
You sound
and
like a
then
cartoon.
Did you get the real oxy or the oxy that's like laced with the Tylenol? That's what I want to know.
no, I didn't get I got the real one. It's
Oh,
no Tylenol threes around here.
there you go. All right. So you're feeling good. That's nice.
Oh no, I am in the clouds. I'm not
There you go.
even.
All right. Well, your question made total sense, so you're fine.
Yay. Okay, great.
Go
Um,
back, go back to the recording so you can hear this.
Shut
I
up,
will
Al.
say, and we're gonna take a break right after this, but I will say I broke my ankle in December, which sucked, but I broke my foot 2 summers ago, and it was when we were in the middle of our accreditation process, and we hired this consultant, and I was the data person on SOE's accreditation process, and I was meeting with this consultant like 3 days after I broke my foot through surgery, whatever. And 6 months later, when I finally was not on Zoom with her and in person, she was like, I just have to tell you, I could see your pupils so clearly on all the Zooms, and you
Yes.
were so high. And I was like, oh, I had a broken foot, was on painkillers. I'm not like a crazy drug addict.
Okay. Yeah, that's why the camera, I'm sorry if it's
It works out.
acceptable. The
No, you're
camera
fine, Verna.
camera will
All
stay
right.
off today.
I have 7:10. Let us resume. Okay, so we are now going to turn to correlations, okay, otherwise known as associations. So think of correlations as telling you the extent to which you can guess the value of one variable given the value of the other variable. In other words, a correlation tells you if one variable is positive, large, or high, or negative, small, or low. The correlation tells you if the other one is positive, large, or high, or negative, small, or low. It simply tells you the extent to which things are related or associated with each other Okay. If then statements, yes. I am going to keep emphasizing the word associated here, though, because as we have talked a little bit about in this class, a correlation does not tell you if something causes something else. It only tells you if something is associated or related to something else. In this class, in most ed and social science research, the most commonly reported correlation statistic is called Pearson's R. It is a product moment correlation, which tells you the extent to which either two things are directly related or associated with each other, or it tells you the extent to which that relationship between those two things changes if you account for a third thing. I will put this all in real world examples and give you, we'll talk more about this in a second. Okay, so now let me start sharing some notes so we can get into the goods here. Okay, so it measures the strength and size and direction and scope of the linear relationship between two variables. Correlations do assume that two things are linearly related. A correlation coefficient ranges from -1 to 1. You will never see a correlation coefficient that is larger and outside of that range. It can be calculated on continuous, either ordered, like high school diploma, some college, grad school, or interval, actual years that you went to school, 12, 13, 14, 15. Variables, it can also be calculated with binary or dummy variables. When it's calculated with a binary variable, it's still the Pearson correlation, but it's called a biserial correlation. Okay, and it can tell you the relationship between X and Y. In terms of the correlation versus causation thing, right? And I actually have tried to kind of do some sleuthing and pinpoint the point in time when we got these things confused. I have not been able to do that, but it seems like what tends to happen is when certain phenomenon are happening and being widely reported in the news that things are related to each other, all of a sudden one news outlet, one publication, newspaper, periodical, local news, national news, whatever, all of a sudden one will up the ante and turn the association into a cause. Okay, so a researcher may conduct a study that says exercise was associated with lower anxiety. That's great and true. And all of a sudden, the headline will become exercise eliminates anxiety. It seems like a lot of the disconnect and inaccuracy is rooted in like clickbait or trying to get people to tune in, right? Also, sometimes people think personal experience is enough to convince you of the validity of something. So if something seems true in our own lives, right, we are more likely to believe this. I didn't feel good. I took vitamin C. My cold went away. Therefore, vitamin C prevents colds, or vitamin C causes colds to disappear, right? In actuality, most common colds just resolve themselves over a specific period of time, right? Who knows if it's actually the vitamin C gummy that people are taking. Positive coefficients equal positive relationships between two variables, okay? In other words, if the coefficient is positive, if one variable is positive, the other variable is positive. If one variable is large, the other variable is large. If the relationship is negative, if one variable is negative, the other one will be negative. The absolute value of the correlation describes the relationship between X and Y perfectly, right? So if the absolute value of the correlation equals 1, so either if the correlation coefficient itself is -1 or 1, it means that the two variables are perfectly correlated with each other. either perfectly negatively or perfectly positively, which essentially means that across all the rows of data, everything is identical. Okay, so if in your data set, every single white female had a college degree, then the white females and college degree would be perfectly positively correlated. If there's no variation in there, if a correlation coefficient equals -1 or 1, it means there's absolutely no variation in the information that fed into that, right? So they are always perfectly associated with each other. If a correlation coefficient is -1 or 1, it means that those two variables are essentially measuring the same thing because there's no change or shift across that information. So you don't actually need to include both of those variables in any of your analysis. Negative coefficients are indicative of negative relationships between two variables. If it's -1, as I said, it's a perfect negative correlation. If a correlation coefficient equals 0, there's no relationship between the two variables, okay? If a correlation coefficient is like 0.07, barely any relationship between them, right? So we do often talk about correlation coefficients in strength ranges, and the strength ranges tend to look like this. So 0 to 0.19, basically very weak or non-existent, 0.2 to 0.39 weak, 0.4 to 0.59 moderate, 0.6 to 0.79 strong, and 0.8 to 1 very strong. Okay? When you report correlation coefficients in analysis, in the text itself, in the sentence, you would say there's a weak, there's a moderate, there's a strong relationship. And then parenthetically, you would say, you use the R notation, you would say R equals like 0.05. And then you would have a table of all your correlation analysis somewhere in the appendix. Here are some visuals to show you the relationships, right? So number 1 is showing you a perfectly negative correlation, right? As X goes up, or as Y goes up, X goes down. And then 2 and 3 are showing you fairly moderate ones, a negative and a positive. 4 is showing you perfectly positively correlated. And then 5 is showing you no relationship. In the no relationship visual, what's missing? Oh, sorry. In number 5, which is where the correlation coefficient equals 0, what is missing from that graph?
There's no trend line
There's no trend line. Why?
because there's no correlation.
Because there's no trend to graph. There is no line of best fit because there's no pattern in the data. The data points are totally random. Cannot compute a relationship. Okay? In terms of thinking through statistical analysis, correlational analysis, regression analysis, right? When in fact there are patterns in the data that the statistics reveal, it means that you can compute a line of best fit with the data that you have. When things are totally random, you can't possibly figure out a line of best fit. Al.
So I'm studying monetary investment for educational success. So the X variable here would be the amount of funding. So lower funding, right? As funding comes down, then grades come down. So that's a positive correlation.
If two things both go down, that's positive. If one goes up and the other goes down, that's negative. If one goes down and the other goes up, that's negative. If both go up, that's positive. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Most of the time when we talk about correlation coefficients, and the presentation of them. We talk about matrices, correlation matrices, and they are usually graphed like this. When you run correlations in any statistical program, SPSS included, you input a number of variables into the command box, and SPSS runs through each variable correlated with every other variable, including itself, which is why in a correlation matrices, you usually have this diagonal one, and that is because a variable is perfectly correlated with itself. Okay? It's for some programs do this. Some programs have taken the default 1.0 out. We usually report them, but it doesn't mean anything, right? What you actually want to pay attention to are the correlation coefficients between the different variables with each other. Okay. Why do some of these correlation coefficients have asterisks?
Because they fall in the range and they're not, oh, like one.
Well, they're not one, that's true. So thus far, we've been only looking at univariate statistics, means, and counts. We are now moving into bivariate statistics where we are looking at the relationship between multiple variables, and asterisks imply statistical significance. Okay? Statistical significance is a notation that tells you that the relationship between two or more variables is caused by something other than chance. Statistical significance is also often referred to as a p-value.
Does that have to do with the decimals? The more asterisks, the more decimals?
The more asterisks, it's not well, yeah, in theory it's more, yeah. It is more decimal places, not more decimals per se, right? Because
Yeah,
there's
I'm
only
sorry. Decimals.
the common notation is one asterisk is that the p-value is less than or equal to 0.05, meaning you can be 95% confident that whatever result the statistic tells you is due to patterns in the data. Two asterisks usually implies P is less than or equal to 0.01, which means you can be 99% confident. And then 3 is usually 0.001, which means you can be 99.9% confident. Statistical significance, this is important. Write this down, put it on the post-it, put it somewhere. Statistical significance has absolutely nothing to do with the size of the statistic. A huge statistic can be statistically significant, and a tiny statistic can be statistically significant. It has nothing to do with the size of whatever you're computing. It has to do with how confident you can be that the statistic is based on patterns in the data versus randomness. Okay? So, if you have a p-value,
Wait, can you repeat?
yep,
wanted to.
statistical significance tells you how confident you can be that the result is not due to chance or randomness, but valid patterns in the data. So if you have a p-value of 0.05, that means you can be 95% confident if you were to randomly pick one student's reading score and one student's writing score, that the correlation between those two would be, so that correlation is 0.60 between reading and writing. Let me go back here for a sec. If that correlation 0.60 was significant at the 0.05 level, you could be 95% confident If I pulled Alvaro's row of data with his reading score and his writing score, I could be that confident that the correlation between those two scores would be strong. Not that it would necessarily equal 0.6, but that it would be in that strong range. Statistical significance has nothing to do with the size or scope of the finding. It's just telling you that this is indicative of patterns in the data and not chance. If you don't have any statistical significance, then you can't say with any degree of confidence what would happen if you randomly pulled data points from the data set. Do we want to go over that again? You could have a correlation coefficient of 0 and have it be statistically significant. And all that would mean is that if you randomly pulled data, a row of data, that there would be no relationship, not strong, not moderate, not weak. There'd be no relationship between the two scores. When you conduct quant research and you run all your analysis, if you don't have any statistically significant results, you can still report them, but you cannot confirm or refute a hypothesis because you can't make a conclusion with any degree of confidence. Al.
So going back to my scenario.
Funding and achievement.
Right. So we're investing more money into tutoring services, and that generates an R value. And then I also look at student retention because of the tutoring services, and that also generates an R value. Then I can compare the two and say that there's a high confidence that one contributes to the other, or is associated to the other, or it's reliable, or it's strong, or stronger.
So you invest more money in tutoring and achievement goes up?
Student retention.
Okay, so we left. Okay, so I don't get the two R values then.
So I'm trying to find a correlation between investing more money.
So you're saying investing more money increases achievement. They're strongly correlated with each other. It's statistically significant. Then you also go and you invest more money in tutoring specifically, and retention goes up.
Right.
Are you trying to say like if A equals B and B equals C, A equals C?
Yeah.
No, correlations don't work that way.
Okay.
You would have to actually do a partial correlation, which we'll talk about in a second.
All right, never mind. Sorry.
But what you could say is that because tutoring is a function of financial investment, right? So general financial investment achievement goes up, specific financial investment retention goes up. You could make comparisons about which financial investment yields the stronger relationship. If they were both statistically significant and the correlation coefficient for the tutoring and the retention was 0.8 and the coefficient between general funding and achievement was 0.6, you could say that the relationship was stronger when you look at a specific investment versus a general one. But you can't make the leap from general investment to the specific thing.
Thank you.
What you could do, which we'll talk about in a couple slides, is you could correlate general investment with achievement and control for retention or control for tutoring. And that would show you how controlling for retention or controlling for tutoring alters the relationship.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so let's just look at these. So remember, a correlation coefficient is simply telling you the extent to which two things are related or associated with each other. Okay, so let's go back to this table here. What do we see? What things are related to each other? So if you recall, we'll go back down here for 1 second. Wait, hold on. I just want to show you the ranges again. All right. So 0.4 to 0.59 is moderate. 0.6 to 0.79 is strong. So let's look at these again. All right. So what do we see? Which test scores are strongly related to each other? And which ones are moderately related to each other?
Math and science are strong,
Math and science are strong. Yep.
and moderate, uh, science and writing.
Yep. Right. So let's look at this math column here. Math is strongly related with reading, writing, and science, right? Science and writing are moderately related at 0.57. Everything is statistically significant, which means that if you were asking a question about the extent to which achievement in one subject is associated with achievement in another, right? You can make conclusions because all of the results are statistically significant. They are all positive, so it appears that at a minimum, achievement in one subject is moderately associated with achievement in another, right? And then in some of the subjects, achievement in one subject is strongly associated with achievement in another subject. Okay? Any questions on this? All right. If you want to open SPSS, now would be the time to do it. If you just want to go through with the screenshots, the notes are already uploaded on Brightspace. I'm going to walk through how you run the correlation coefficients. It's all under analyze. Remember, anytime you are computing something, a mean, a frequency, a crosstab, a correlation, even a regression model, it's all analyze. Anytime you're doing data management or cleaning, it's that transform menu. So we're going to go analyze, correlate, bivariate. Okay. That means we're correlating two variables with each other. Your window pops up. You want Pearson. It's the most common for numeric or ranked data. When you have non-parametric data that you assume not to be normally distributed, then you would go to the Kendall's or the Spearman. The data we have now is all appropriate for the Pearson. Okay, similar to our descriptive statistics, it's just an empty box and you move your variables in. You can move as many variables in there as you want, and it will generate a table that has the variables across the columns and down the rows, and it will yield the correlations between those. Okay, so you move the variables in, you click OK, and out pops your correlation matrix. Okay, as you can see, down the diagonal is that 1. SAT verbal score correlated with SAT verbal is 1. SAT math with itself is 1. Okay. So here we have SAT verbal score, SAT math score, your overall high school GPA, your family income, and your highest degree earned. So we have high school achievement metrics correlated with educational attainment and income. So based on this, what variables, let's not worry about significance yet. What things are positively associated with each other? So you want to look at the row next to the Pearson correlation. So let's start with the verbal score. What is the verbal score positively correlated with?
Math,
Math. What else?
Because it has 0.748.
Yep, 0.7. Yep. So when you report coefficients, you go to two significant digits. So in your table and in the text, you would put 0.75, right? What else is SAT verbal score positively correlated with?
Overall GPA,
Yep, GPA, 0.38. What else?
everything.
Everything, right. Now, based on this column, if I asked you which measure your verbal score had the strongest association with, what would your answer be?
Math.
Yeah, your SAT verbal score has the strongest association with your math score. Which variable does it have the weakest relationship with?
Family income.
Family income, right. It also has a fairly weak relationship with your highest degree earned and your overall GPA in high school, right? So much for your SATs mattering in terms of prediction, right? Now, are any of these associations statistically significant? So what's the first sign of statistical significance? What's the notation?
They have a confidence of 3 asterisks.
It's
Or
the asterisks, right? The other thing you can see is under the Pearson correlation, it says significance. That also gives you the significance level, right? So in looking at the correlations between the verbal score and everything else, all of the correlations are statistically significant at the same level, 0.001, which means you can be 99.9% confident that that association is based on actual patterns in the data. So across the data set that this is based on, this means you can be very confident that a respondent with a high verbal score has a high math score. Does that make sense?
Wait, I'm confused because the concept makes sense, but the table that you showed us before, it had less than 0.01 is 99% confidence.
This
But
is 0.001.
so then why
So
is there not three asterisks?
99.9%.
So how come there's not 3 asterisks?
Oh, I think SPSS might just use 2. It might
Oh,
just be at 0.001 in that, yeah.
okay, cool.
APA notation is the 3, 2, and the 1.
so that's what they
Okay.
refer to two-tailed.
Yep. Meaning based on a normal-ish distribution. When you have skewed data, tails refer to like the outliers in the data, right? When you have skewed data, the assumption is that there probably isn't a tail on one side. So the Pearson, remember, is assuming that the data itself is somewhat normally-ish distributed, right? And that the relationship approximates a linear relationship. Okay.
So a normal distribution is a bell curve.
A perfectly normal distribution is a bell curve. A normal-ish distribution means that the mean and the median are close to each other and that there are a very small number of outliers on both sides. A skewed distribution assumes that there are only outliers on the positive side or the negative side. Okay, let's look at some examples here. Okay, GPA and graduation. Researchers found that undergrad GPA is positively correlated with earning a graduate degree. The correlation coefficient was 0.48 and it was significant at the 0.01 level. Can you conclude that a higher GPA causes students to earn graduate degrees? What do you think?
Isn't the R value
Why
supposed
not?
to be higher?
Uh, one at a time. Al, what'd you say?
The R value shouldn't be close to 1.
Well, it's positively correlated because it's greater than zero, right? And it's in the moderate range, 0.48. Researchers found that GPA is positively correlated. Remember, a positive correlation could be zero point 0.1. It's a weak one, but it's still positive.
Mhm.
And then someone said something, was it Verna or Rhonda? What'd you say, Rhonda? Sorry.
Oh, I just said answer the question. I said yes, it could be.
Is
It could be a
Rhonda right?
core.
Can you conclude that higher GPA causes?
Oh, causes? Did you say causes? Oh no, not
Right.
causes.
What
Sorry.
should I replace causes with?
Correlates.
Correlates, is associated, is related, right?
Hmm.
Because what other variables might influence your GPA and your degree attainment?
Hmm.
Money.
Money. Yes. Do you have money to keep going?
The
What else?
level of support,
Level of other kinds of support,
academic
socio-emotional,
support, academic support.
academic. Yeah. What about motivation, engage, right? There's a ton of other factors that may be at play here, right? How could a hypothesis about the relationship between GPA and graduate degree be tested? Would you devise an experimental research design or a longitudinal one?
Longitudinal would take too long.
It would take longer, yeah. What do you think? If I said draft a research design, a methodological framework looking at the relationship between GPA and earning a graduate degree, formulate a hypothesis, would you design an experimental study or a longitudinal study? There's no wrong answer here. Al's going experimental clearly because longitudinal will take too long. Other thoughts?
And the longer it takes, it costs more money.
Well, you're paying if it's in the context of you as a grad student, it does cost more money. Could you do an experimental design for this?
Well, what would be your control group in an experimental design?
So what you could do is a quasi-experimental design. If you remember, quasi-experimental is when there's some sort of naturally occurring condition or intervention that you did not plan it, but it happened, right? So maybe there is like student support services at at one campus versus another that like steps in when freshmen drop below a certain GPA, right? And
How
comes
about
in.
BMCC has $1.2 million budget while another college only has 50,000?
There you go.
I just had that meeting this week.
1.2 billion, did you say?
Million
Million. Okay.
per year on academic support versus another campus only 50K.
And how many of BMCC's grads go on to four-year institutions?
That would be good to study that. Yeah.
Right? That's a quasi-experimental design. The intervention that Al did not necessarily design or have any say into is the influx of money and resources versus a school that doesn't, right? You could also look at this longitudinally, right? You could look at GPA over time. You could look at different cohorts of students, right? There's a lot of different quant methods here that you could look at. You could look at students who start at two-year institutions. You could look at students who go to small liberal arts versus giant universities. Melissa,
But like, isn't this too broad?
what
Because
do you mean?
you could look at GPA and graduation attainment, but I don't know, wouldn't you have to be more specific as far as like major, like what study?
I mean, this would
Or
not, first of all, this is not, if this is your general dissertation question, there's got to be a lot of sub-questions about type of institution, degree of or field of study, socioeconomic indicators, right? Very rarely, I can think of one example of a quant study where it just looked at like two standalone factors with no controls, and it's a hard science study about like a drug trial. But if you're dealing with like actual data from real people outside of like the confines of pharmaceuticals or lab, there's a million confounding factors that need to come in here.
Mhm.
Right? Did the student have access to financial aid? Like you got somebody said something about supports. Are you first gen? Right? You can graduate with a 4.0, but you're not getting a grad degree in many cases if you're first gen because you need to go right to work. Are you graduating with debt? If you're graduating with debt, maybe you need to go to work to pay for it. Okay, scenario 2. Ice cream and drownings. Researchers found that ice cream sales are positively correlated with drowning incidents. Correlation coefficient is 0.77. Statistically significant. P is less than 0.01. Cities do sell more ice cream during months when drowning deaths increase. So does eating ice cream cause drowning?
No.
No, eating ice cream does not cause drowning. What's missing from this discussion? What's the confounding factor that's leading to this? So one, a correlation can't tell you causation to begin with. It tells you that there's a positive correlation. So when ice cream sales go up, the number of drowning incidents go up, right? The more drowning incidents, the more drowning deaths. But what's really at play here that explains why the ice cream sales are up and why the drowning incidents are up?
Summertime.
It's summertime, yes. Time of year.
Mhm. Professor, I'm gonna have to log out though.
Okay, that's fine. You hung in a really long time, Verna. I'm impressed.
Feel better, Berna.
Thanks, guys. Can we try for office hours?
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
perfect. Thank
Send
you,
me an email.
everyone.
Bye, rest
Yep.
up.
Everyone have a good night.
Okay, so when you are correlating one variable with another variable, it's a direct straight correlation. But sometimes there is a third measure that you want to think about. Sometimes the relationship between two variables requires controlling for a third. Essentially, you're trying to figure out what happens to that association when you consider a third factor. Basically, this is when you think the association varies based on something else. Okay? So, the relationship potentially to go back to the GPA one, GPA and degree attainment, perhaps controlling for family resources, perhaps controlling for amount of educational debt. To do a partial correlation, analyze, correlate, same first steps, but instead of doing bivariate, now you go to partial because now you need a command box that allows you to control for something. Okay, so we're going to look at GPA and highest degree, but we're going to control for sex. So we're going to use a dummy variable for male. So you do this when you think either your research question initially asks about the relationship with this third factor, or your initial analysis looking at GPA and degree led you to more questions. And so you want to see what happens when you control for this additional factor.
Didn't we do something like this for the first homework, the first lab? Creating a dummy variable or something?
Yeah, we create, yeah. Mhm. For male, exactly. And many of you did male, some of you did ones for education degree earned. Okay, so the bivariate correlation between overall high school GPA and highest degree earned is 0.48, moderate and statistically significant. The partial correlation for GPA and degree earned controlling for male. So looking only at being the male subsample. Right? Oh, sorry. Oh, go back. Here we go. Is 0.47 still, sorry, I'm missing the asterisk, still significantly, statistically significant. They're both statistically significant, which means that you can report both of them, right? They're not due to chance, they're due to actual patterns in the data. What happens to the relationship when you control for male? Does it change a lot? No. 0.48, 0.47, still moderately positively correlated.
What is the DF difference?
Degrees of freedom, that's the total number in the analysis, in the sample, -1. So that means that if you are looking at data in the top one, in the bivariate, when you're just correlating GPA and highest degree, that there are that many people have rows of data in there. And then once you control for male, the number goes down like a little bit because not everybody reported their gender in the data set. And actually not everybody reported either, because if you remember, the total number of rows is 8,984. But the degrees of freedom is the sample size on that measure -1. So the small change in the correlation suggests that gender does not substantially explain the relationship. Okay, it barely changes it. Questions? Do we feel like we could go into SPSS, analyze, correlate, put things in, get output, and tell me what's statistically significant, what's weak, what's moderate, what's strong?
Might as well do it because that lab 2 is due soon.
What do we think? Do we want more practice? Okay, let's do some more practice then. All right, let's open up SPSS. All right, let's do some. All right, I will share my SPSS screen if anybody wants to open theirs at home, but you guys are going to dictate what we do here. So, share. All right, we all see my data file. Okay, variable view. Where am I going to initiate the correlation analysis? Which menu?
Analyze,
Analyze. Now what?
correlate.
Correlate. Now what?
Buy something or other.
Bivariate.
Bivariate. Okay. Let's do mom's education level. Let's do high school GPA.
I
Let's
did
do,
have a question.
yeah.
What's the difference between going through correlation bivariate versus the Pearson option that's already provided?
Oh, you mean in the menu?
Yeah.
The Pearson option doesn't give you the significance levels. You have to like go in and manually tell it, and it doesn't yield the matrix in that way. And there is in SPSS, when you get your output files with all the tables, you can export that out into Excel. And so then you can just basically like copy those tables and put them into your assignments, your documents, eventually, like if you're doing a quant dissertation, chapter 4. And if you go the other way, you have to manually make everything. It's just like a nicer package situation.
Thanks. Sorry.
No problem. Okay, so let's do mom's education. Let's do high school GPA. Let's do job satisfaction, and let's do income. Okay, Pearson's. Let's click OK. Here's our output window. Here's our correlation matrix. What do we notice? What's the diagonal down? Here's our ones, because everything with itself. Okay, let's start with what is your mother's level of education positively associated with? So mom's, let's start here. What is the correlation coefficient between mom's level of education and your high school GPA?
0.241.
0.241, right? Fairly weak, right? Is it statistically significant?
Yes.
It's
Yes.
positive.
Okay. Positive. Good. What about your mom's level of education and how much you like your job?
Very weak.
Minimal at best. And also, what else is missing there?
Not significant.
Not statistically significant. What about your mom's level of education and how much you made at your job?
Yeah, it's only 0.13 asterisk.
0.18. Yeah. Weak, but positive. Okay. So people whose moms had higher levels of education did have slightly higher GPAs and made a little bit more money, and there was no bearing on their job satisfaction. Is anything negatively correlated?
GPA and job satisfaction.
People with higher GPAs, right? And it's statistically significant, are not happier at their jobs. What else is negatively associated?
Is it the salary and the job satisfaction?
Yeah, people who make more money are not as satisfied at their jobs. Thoughts on that?
More responsibility.
Maybe
More-
more responsibility, more money,
work to
more
be
problems.
done after work and not get paid.
Okay. Questions on this? If you're a high school guidance counselor and you're looking at this data and you're thinking about advising your students about their futures, what might you tell them based on this?
Become a plumber, an electrician.
Well,
Plumbers and
Right.
electricians make more money than I do, so let's not knock that.
No, I'm saying
And they-
that you should pursue that instead of getting a high level degree, because just because you make more money doesn't mean, you're gonna be
Doesn't
happy.
mean you're happier at work, right?
The problem is
100%.
when your hands don't work after you become a mechanic and you're in your 40s, then you gotta
Well,
go back to school, right?
there's that part too. Now, any questions on that before we try a couple more things? Do we feel like at the very least we could go in and compute the correlations?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Let's
You got
do
the
this. Come on.
Rhonda, you got the
Tomorrow's late.
screenshots. Okay, they're in the notes. All right, now let's just look. I want to look at one more thing. So let's go back. Let me just check my. All right, let's do a partial correlation. All right, so let's look at what happens when you control for gender. So analyze, correlate. Now where am I going? If I want to control for a third factor, am I going to bivariate?
No, partial.
Partial. There you go. All right, so let's look at the income and the job satisfaction. So here's the income. Here's the job satisfaction. And let's control for male. All right. Let's see what happens. All right, so let me move this. Okay. So if you recall, the initial correlation between income and job satisfaction was negative 0.11, essentially, right? What is it when you control for gender?
The same thing.
The same thing. What does your gender matter in terms of the association between how much you make and how much you like your job?
No.
No. Which means basically across the data set, men and women are equally dissatisfied with their jobs as they make more money. Okay, tonight's lab is basically asking you to repeat and reproduce what we did tonight. Okay, you have to go into the data set. You have to generate research questions, including income and job satisfaction, and then high school GPA and job satisfaction. I'm going to ask you to do a preliminary step and run descriptives. Again, just attach the output file. That's fine, right? Come up with a research question and a hypothesis about the relationships between these variables. And then based on the correlations, tell me if you can confirm the hypothesis or refute it. And then the second part of the lab, you will need to make a dummy variable. You may need to. The second part of the lab, which is individual, is to, based on your own dissertation topics, generate a research question that could be addressed through correlational analysis. For some of you, this question already exists because the way that you are starting to conceptualize this thing is very much, Rhonda, you and I talked about this. Correlational analysis would certainly be the preliminary step around understanding like these land-grant institutions and the funding mechanisms, right? Remember, the key to a research question that is dependent on correlational analysis is the verb. No impact, no cause, no effect. Association, related. What is the relationship between A and B? Are A and B associated? If A goes up, does B go up? Not to what extent does A cause B? How much does A change B? None of that. Okay? We are just trying to understand how things are associated with each other. Questions. I have 8:17 and I feel like I don't have the bandwidth, so we will stop tonight. What I am going to ask of you guys is the last like 10 to 16 slides introduce means comparisons. Read through them before our next class. I will also remind you guys of this so that we come with a little bit of background knowledge on means comparisons, because our next class, which is our last class, will be all about means comparisons, both just comparing two groups to each other and comparing more than two groups to each other. Any questions? Okay, so this lab is due a week from tomorrow, I think on Thursday. I forget the dates. It's next week. And then your second quant memo is due on the 22nd. And if you have not yet sent me the link to your survey and I've looked at it, please do that. And if you haven't communicated with me about your survey, also please do that. Otherwise, I'm gonna stop the recording for tonight. Melissa.
Do we need to send the survey out to like a sample of individuals related to our dissertation? Because I know I made mine related to my topic.
You need to send that out to a sample of individuals who could reasonably answer those questions.
So, no.
So they don't need to be, this is a pilot phase essentially, right? They need to either like put themselves in the position of, which is what you would say to the in the email, because you're not just going to send people a link with no information. If there are people who worked with that population, that could be fine. If you want to ask people to imagine and put themselves in that scenario, that would be fine, right? The purpose of the exercise is more about designing quality questions, programming an instrument, and then getting data to clean.
And,
You
and
will not be analyzing that data in the way that you analyze the NLSY data set because one, the sample size would be considerably smaller, and two, it's a convenient sample. You guys don't have the time, nor did you technically have IRB clearance to go out and sample the appropriate people.
so the sample that we're sending it out to, you said it has to be at least 20 people?
Mhm.
And
And if
then
you want help with that, like I said, send it to me and I'll send it to I think my network's up to like 117 people and they're like grad school colleagues, cousins who just think it's fun when I send them surveys to go through.
okay.
Other questions?
Thank you.